Welcome to 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Vivian Carlin. Between our two households, we're navigating life with 10 children, so we know how chaotic parenting can be. As Johns Hopkins-trained pediatricians, we also know the science. Our goal is to bring you the best of both worlds, medically sound, trustworthy advice, and practical, real-world insights as we dive into the trials and triumphs of parenting. Please note this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment from your doctor.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin. So today we want to turn our attention to something a little bit more serious, and we'd like to focus on drowning prevention. This is a much needed topic as we approach the summer months, and this is a perfect time for us to be talking about drowning and pool safety. And before we begin, I do want to advise listeners this episode contains some discussion and depiction of drowning, which may be upsetting to some listeners. Okay, so Sylvia, before we start talking about this topic, I'd kind of like to paint a picture for the listeners of why this is so important to you and me and why we are so hypervigilant about drowning prevention. And I think almost everyone who trains in pediatrics at some point takes care of a patient who either dies from drowning or has a near drowning event with neurologic deficit or sequela afterwards. And I'm curious if you have any experiences like that from your training or from your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Drowning and near drowning episodes is something that I think every pediatrician who is trained in an ER or ICU setting has experience with, unfortunately. And I do agree. That's why we as both moms and pediatricians are very hypervigilant when it comes to pool safety and drowning. Mm-hmm. I remember when I started working my job in the ER as an attending 8-year-old who had a drowning episode in a nearby pool in the community that I live in and the pool that we belong to. And it was very notable because could have been my child, right? This is in our community, in our pool. Yeah. And that child died in the ER from a drowning episode, and a previously healthy child just one afternoon playing in a pool. And that stays with you as a pediatrician, right? And then I remember the parents coming in afterwards, previously healthy child, just kind of trying to grasp what is going on here and what's happening to my child. It was just watching the parents' grief is overwhelming, right?
Yeah, so sad. I have a similar experience. I took care of a patient who was in a long-term rehabilitation facility after a near drowning event. And they had a near drowning, went into full cardiac and respiratory arrest, had CPR performed and did survive. However, the child had just, devastating neurologic consequences after that and didn't fully recover. And this particular patient, the mother was similar in age to me. We had children similar ages, and she was also a physician. And there was just such a sense of, which I already knew, this could be me, like this could happen to me. And I think that's really important, a reality that you and I knew as pediatricians, but something to impress upon our listeners. It's not about how smart you are or how educated you are. It's about creating multiple layers of systems in place of protection, because you have to have a sense and a realization that this could happen to anybody. It only takes a moment. Children drown within 30 seconds to 2 minutes. We're talking about a very short amount of time. And that event could happen to anyone. You have to put so many measures in place for drowning prevention and pool safety. And that's what we really hope to impress upon listeners today.
Yeah. I think we as trained pediatricians, our first experience with pool and pool safety was in this context of tragedy. And then we became parents bringing our children to the pool, right? So the amount of hypervigilance that we have as parents can be thought of as amplified based on our experiences, right?
So what I'd like to do first is start by talking about the scope of the problem. So the number one cause of childhood death for children between the ages of 1 and 4 is drowning. And if we look at this graph that's on the CDC website, we see the spike in number of drowning deaths in that age group. So for the scope of our discussion today, and knowing that we're heading into summer and knowing that the majority of drownings occur between the ages of 1 and 4 in pools, we're going to talk about pool safety. So pool safety when you're at the pool, as well as pool safety when you are not at the pool. Pool safety when it is not swim time. And one of the resources I really like for this is put out by the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. And they talk about the 5 layers of protection. Okay, so the first being barriers and alarms, the second being supervision, the third being water competency, the fourth being life jackets, and the fifth being emergency preparation. So we're going to examine each one of these, but where I want to start is let's talk about when you are taking your kids to the pool. So that's going to involve these ones: supervision, water competency, life jackets, emergency preparation. So it's swim time. We are going to the pool to swim. So the first layer of protection they talk about is supervision, and there's 2 components to that. So one of them is to have an adult that you know is watching the pool. And they have this idea of designating a water watcher. So if you're with a lot of family, or if you're with other families, designate one adult at all time who is sole job is to watch the water. They even make these bands that you can order, but it could really be anything that you stick on your wrist to remind you that at this point in time, you are the water watcher. Your phone is put away. You're not having conversation or getting distracted. You're watching the pool. So I think that's a really interesting idea. It's somebody who's not under the influence of alcohol or any other substances. They are devoted to watching the pool, and you can even rotate. Like, I'm passing the band to somebody else. I have to go to the bathroom. Here you have the band. Really good idea when you have lots of kids in the pool, like if you're at a pool party or, again, out with a lot of friends or with family at a pool. The second is they recommend that for any child that cannot swim independently, you are touch distance from them. And I think of that as I am swimming with one of my children one-on-one, teaching them how to swim, right? Like, I'm helping them. They go under the water for too long. I lift them back up. This is what I think about as touch distance supervision. How do you think of that, Sylvia?
Right. Like, you can reach down. If they splutter too long, you can just pull them right up out of the water, right? That's touch distance.
So we've talked about supervision. The next one is water competency. And really, lessons for toddlers are the first step towards water safety. So by age 4, most children will have the ability that they can learn basic water survival skills, such as floating on their back or treading water or getting to an exit point. And by 5 or 6, most children can really start mastering freestyle or a front crawl stroke for even more safety. So Sylvia, tell me, what was your method for teaching your children to swim? Like, what was your philosophy on this?
So, swimming and teaching our children to swim was a big priority in my parenting. I want to say 3 years old, where we started our very first one-on-one swim lesson offered by our community association. And it was just basically a teenage swim instructor who was very enthusiastic, peppy, and fun, who did this, standard way of teaching toddlers how to swim that started with blowing bubbles, putting your head under the water, just basic holding your breath when going under. And we did that for each of our children, the summer that they were around 3 or 4 years of age. And then following that, we actually moved towards kind of just my husband and I doing swim, where we would go to the swimming pool almost once a week. My husband would be in the pool, kind of using those skills and getting our kids to start swimming, whether or not it was a little doggy paddle, whether or not it's big arms, but some sort of way of swimming across the pool. And after they got across the pool, any way, shape, or form, it wasn't very pretty. It wasn't like an official stroke. Sure. We actually enrolled them into our summer swim team, where, in order to make the swim team, you could be any age, but you had to get across the pool.
Yes.
125-yard pool.
Yeah.
Any way, shape, or form. And then you were on the team. And then all summer long, the swim team taught them more and more confidence in the water. What did you guys do?
Yeah, I would say teaching our children to swim was a very high priority. I kind of think of it on the same lines as teaching them to sleep in their own bed, teaching them to read, teaching them to drive, these goals that we all have to accomplish at some point in our parenting. And there was such a relief when I could check the box, with each child, one child at a time, as, okay, I know now you have good water competency. I feel so much more confident that if you're in a pool, you can get to the edge safely. I did have one child that had a little bit different of a learning style. And I just knew with this child, the lessons where they are just going to wait and encourage you to put your face in the water and start off with that face in the water, blowing bubbles, front crawl stroke was just not going to work well. And it was going to delay the amount of time it took for this child to get to water competency. And I actually did lessons with this child where they learned to like go underwater and then immediately pop up and float on their back. And that got them to a safe point much faster than the other way. And then over the next year or two, that child who was now safe in the water developed competency as far as that forward front crawl. So I did a little bit of thinking outside the box just to try to get this child more quickly to a point where I felt safe that if they were in the water, they could get to the edge. So
yeah, like a different learning curve, right?
But yes, that was very much our method. Huge priority. We need to be in the pool during the summer because it's very hot here. Obviously, we're at the pool all the time. And there was such a sigh of relief when everybody could swim. Okay, so we've talked about supervision. We've talked about touch distance and the water watcher. We've talked about water competency and the importance of swim lessons. Let's talk briefly about life jackets.
You know, the AAP recommends to put a child in a properly fitted U.S. Coast Guard approved life jacket when around or near water. Do you have experience using life jackets in pools?
So life jackets did play an important role in my parenting and pool safety. And let me explain. So obviously we know life jackets do not help with water competency. I mean, they actually can create a false sense of protection or security. And I had one child, I remember we were at a pool party. He was 4. We had stopped to eat lunch. We were sitting there eating lunch and he finished and he instinctively ran to the pool and jumped in. And he like kind of floundered for a second and then got to the side. And he came up out of the pool and he was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that because I thought I had my floaty on, right? When there were lots of kids in the water at this pool party, I had him wearing a floaty, even though he was learning skills to swim. And he expressed that I was so used to having my floaty, I just jumped in expecting my floaty. That's exactly what life jackets can do, where they give you this false sense of security. And then when you don't have a life jacket, you kind of freak out and aren't sure what to do. But where I found life jackets was really helpful was when I was going to the pool by myself with multiple of my own children who didn't have that like great water competency yet. So, I mean, at one point I had 6 children that were 9 and under. So I probably had at least 3 in that high risk age range at one time, that, 1 to 4, like mobile, wandering off, but not fully competent to swim confidently at a distance. And if I could work with them one-on-one in the pool, touch distance, then no life jacket. Like that's where we would train and get used to what it felt like without a life jacket. But there were so many times when I really just needed to be water watcher and keeping an eye on all of my children at the same time. And if I'm one-on-one with somebody, then I'm naturally distracted and not paying attention to everyone. And so in that scenario, putting any of my children that didn't have that full water competency into a floaty or a life jacket was a lifesaver for us because I can continue to scan back and forth and count them. I know where everybody is, and I don't have to be touch distance to all of them because I can't do that on my own all at the same time. So it was sort of a balance of using life jackets to give us the freedom and the enjoyment of going to the pool without being overwhelmed and keeping everybody safe. And then when I had those chances to be one-on-one training, not using life jackets, so my child would be learning what it feels like without the jacket and developing water competency that way. The other scenario that I really like the use of life jackets in, and I kind of alluded to this before, is if we were in any scenario where there were a lot of kids, like a pool party or a summer camp, and they're just in those early ages of developing water competency, because it's one thing to be able to, on your own, swim the length of the pool. That's great water competency, but it's a whole nother scenario when you're in the pool with 20, 30, 40 kids and you're roughhousing and playing around and still being able to get yourself to the edge safely, not get in trouble in the deep end. I feel like that takes another level of water competency to be safe in that scenario. So I held on to using floaties or life jackets just a little bit longer in those scenarios where there was a lot of kids around and some roughhousing and playing.
No, that sounds like a perfect use for that.
So the last thing we should talk about with this, layers of safety while at the pool is emergency preparation and this idea that you want somebody to activate 911 quickly if there's an incident, and if there's somebody on site who can perform CPR. We know that in all scenarios, bystander CPR initiated quickly saves lives.
Yeah. The AAP recommends parents get CPR certified. Sometimes seconds, can make a big difference. And if parents are available and know how to perform basic first CPR, then that could be life-changing and outcome-changing as well.
I think a final thing I see on the NDPA brochure on emergency preparation that's important when we talk about pool time is that if a child goes missing, you always check the pool first. So, maybe the child did go into the house to go to the bathroom, but if you're looking for the child, look at the pool first and then go find them somewhere else. Okay, in the second half, I want to devote our attention to pool safety when you are not swimming, because unfortunately, 70% of childhood drowning deaths do occur during times when the child was not supposed to be swimming. All right, so as we've pointed out, we need to draw awareness to how to keep children safe when there is a pool and people are not swimming. The child isn't swimming, they're in their regular clothes, they're not in a swimsuit. I want our listeners to be aware and informed that pools can be dangerous, especially when there is nobody swimming. And we really want to talk about how to keep children safe from the pool. So why don't you start us off?
Parents don't really think about that. They often think about drowning in the context of while we're swimming or at a party or having fun at a pool. But it's those times when you're not thinking about it and the pool isn't first and foremost on your mind that I think this episode is really telling you it should always be on your mind if a pool is present, right?
I'd like to point listeners back to the National Drowning Prevention Alliance website, where again, you find a link to a campaign called The Clothes They Wore. And it just highlights the heartbreaking reality of childhood drownings through powerful testimonies. So they actually have recorded these brave parents telling these stories of their children drowning in this scenario during non-swim times when their children were just wearing regular clothes. Nobody was supposed to be swimming. And I think it's a great resource because it's, while exceptionally sad, it should be very eye-opening for all of us about how quickly and easily this can happen and how much we need to be on guard and provide layers of protection.
I'm not saying that people shouldn't have backyard pools, or, if you're staying at a vacation home or a rental for a week or something, and you want to enjoy a pool as well in your rental home, that's perfectly fun as well. But there are things that we want you to be aware of for the safety of your children, toddlers and children, when a backyard pool is present where you're staying.
Yeah, when I think about this, there's been a couple of times that I've stayed with other families at an Airbnb or VRBO that has had a pool. And I mean, I am literally like zooming in on pictures of the pool, trying to discern, is there a fence all the way around? Do I trust that gate? I often pack those cable ties so I can plastic cable tie it if I have any concern that the gate latch isn't strong enough to keep my child out. I mean, I am hyper vigilant about pool safety in these scenarios. So looking further at the National Drowning Prevention Alliance, they have a brochure entitled The 5 Layers of Pool Protection. And in the first half, we talked about the ones that are safety measures with regards to times that you're at the pool. But a really important safety measure is barriers and alarms. And I think the first thing we should talk about is fencing. So, on the NDPA website as well as in the AAP, they'll talk about fencing and the importance of having a perimeter fence around the pool so that children that don't live in the house cannot get into the pool. I also think if there's a toddler in the home, that idea of having a fence that blocks access to the pool directly from the home is so helpful as well.
The American Academy of Pediatrics does have recommendations that the fence is 4 feet high and completely surrounding the pool, kind of what you are talking about. The second thing that the AAP recommends is to take a look at the fence and make sure that it's not climb proof. So there's no footholds or handholds on the fencing that allows people or children to scale the fence and get over. They also recommend that you not put lawn furniture or play equipment nearby the fence so people can scale the fence easier. They recommend no chain linked fences. Those are not great. I mean, they're barriers, but not deterrents. And then they recommend if you do have a fence that your slats are less than 4 inches apart, because oftentimes smaller children can fit through the slats of the fence. The latch height should be out of the reach of children, 54 inches off of the ground, and to have a gate lock that locks the gate closed when you're not using it. And they encourage, which I think is very interesting, to keep the pool area toy free, to not leave toys or fun things kind of strewn around the pool that makes it tempting for kids to want to be out there for another reason.
That's very interesting. Again, I feel like all of these mechanisms are never going to be 100%. There's always something that can go wrong. With the fence and the gate and the latching mechanism, what if somebody props open the gate and leaves it open? What if the latch mechanism is broken? What if one of the fence bars is broken, right? With the door alarm for getting out of the house, what if you're taking a shower and you don't hear the alarm go off when your toddler opens the door? None of these things is 100%. So the point is you put multiple systems in place so that if one fails or isn't perfect, the other one there is also to catch it. It's just adding that extra layer so that we're making this statistically less and less likely that a drowning event could occur.
Absolutely. The last thing that they talk about are pool covers. If you have a pool cover, it must cover the entire pool securely so that a child can't slip under them. Oftentimes, floating solar or floating winter covers are not safety covers, and they can actually increase the drowning risk because people think that they're solid. And when a child steps on them, they can slip into the pool and then get under the cover and be trapped that way. It also reduces visibility. If there's a child underneath the pool cover, at first glance at the pool, you will not visually see them, right?
Yeah. I'm also really intrigued by these pool safety nets they make now, that the sole purpose is to prevent somebody from falling in the pool, but that can still allow the pool to be serviced and cleaned. So again, just another idea for putting multiple systems of safety in place.
I feel like all of these measures, when you have an at-home pool, it's putting the responsibility onto that homeowner and that pool owner. There is a certain degree of responsibility you have by owning a pool to ensure that it is a safe environment where people won't accidentally fall in or drown in your pool. And I think these recommendations kind of illustrate how to be a responsible pool owner. Right.
And I think these recommendations are particularly poignant if you are a pool owner who also has toddlers living in your house or frequently visiting your house. It's super important to guard. If you're a parent who has all teenagers who can swim, then these are just things to be aware of for when you do have toddlers visiting your house. But if you have kids in that high risk 1 to 4 age range frequently at your house or living at your house, then it is so important to have systems in place to protect the pool from any drowning events. Finally, we're going to say this again and again every time, teach our children to swim, right?
And for the last thing is for pool owners to know how to recognize signs of distress amongst their swimmers. And it's encouraged that parents learn CPR.
So in conclusion, I want our listeners to understand that these near drowning or drowning events could happen to anyone, right? It happens more frequently than you might realize. It is the leading cause of death in children ages 1 to 4. It's actually more common for children to drown in pools when no one is swimming than during swim time. We really need to be on high alert around pools. So this episode was focused on swim safety, how to protect our children during swim times, and then also what mechanisms to put in place to protect them from access to a pool during non-swim times.
I want to reiterate again that you and I used pools during the summer as a way to have fun, to keep our kids active, to teach them new skills. And pool time can be super fun, right, for a family. And I don't want to discourage people from going to the pool and enjoying the pool, but I want people to understand that this is, a recommendations on how to be safe while doing that, right? This has been a great discussion just to kind of, as we approach the summer, frame of mind that parents should be thinking in creating a safe environment related to pool and pool safety.
This is 10 Kids, 2 Docs. I'm Dr. Vivian Carlin.
And I'm Dr. Sylvia Bank. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to 10 Kids, 2 Docs, hosted and created by Sylvia Bank and Vivian Carlin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and recommend our podcast to other listeners. Visit our website at 10kids2docs.com, where you can find links to social media and leave comments or suggestions. Back next week with more topics in parenting.